If you want to run a mail server on the public internet, you need to add a few records on your DNS server. So there are some DNS records that are absolutely necessary to send and receive emails, but also some other ones that are recommended to build a good reputation. And why is that so important? Well, because spam emails are a really big problem on the internet, and most mail servers will just reject your emails if your mail server has a bad reputation. So in this video we talk about all the different DNS records. I will explain how they work and also come up with some examples how I configured that on my own domain, thedigitallife.com. So if you want to know how to run a fully functional mail server on the public internet, keep watching. Hi everybody, my name is Christian and welcome to The Digital Life, the right place for you to start your IT career, achieve new skills and learn how to become a real IT professional. I always do great videos and free training courses. I also do a lot live streaming on YouTube and Twitch, so if that sounds all amazing to you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. In this video we want to talk about DNS records for your mail server and how to configure them on your DNS provider. So I'm using GoDaddy as my DNS provider, so depending on what DNS provider you're using, that can look different, but the DNS records should all work the same way. Let's jump right into the DNS configuration for your mail server, and we will start with the most simple DNS record, and this is an A record. So I strongly recommend you to add an A record for your mail server that will resolve to the public IP address. And this is very important. We will have a look at this later why. And this is also absolutely necessary if your web server is on a different IP address than your mail server. So when you add an A record to your DNS server, you usually choose a name like mail or anything like this, and this will be added in front of your domain. So in my case this is mail.thedigitallife.com, and this is also called the fully qualified domain name of your mail server, which will resolve to the public IP address so everyone knows how to contact your mail server. If you want to set up an A record for your mail server, you just go to the homepage of your DNS provider. In my case this is GoDaddy, and after login I select DNS, manage zones, and then I will enter the name of my domain. In my case this is thedigitallife.com. And if we scroll down we can see a list of all the different DNS records that are currently active. So of course I have added all the necessary records already, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to receive emails, but I will show you step by step how you would add those records yourself. But if you want to create a new one, you just scroll down, click on add, and then select the type A record. Then you should add the host name. I would just recommend you to use mail. And then you will need to enter the public IP address of your mail server. Click on save, and you should see the A records on top of that list here. The next DNS record we need to add is the MX record. That stands for Mail Exchanger, and that will tell anyone which mail server is responsible for that specific domain. Let me do a quick example. So when you want to send an email to christian@thedigitallife.com, your mail server will first need to check what mail server is responsible for the domain thedigitallife.com. So your mail server will do a DNS lookup to the MX record on my DNS server, and that will tell you where should a connection be established to. So the MX record on my DNS server will point to the A record of my mail server, which is the fully qualified domain name. So let me just show you how that works. To add a Mail Exchanger record, just click on add and select the type MX. Then you need to enter a host name, so this can be an ad. And this should point to the fully qualified domain name of your mail server. So this is the A record we have just created. So in my case this is mail.thedigitallife.com. Now we need to add a priority. So when you have different mail servers, you can add a priority. So when one mail server is offline, for example, you can have a backup mail server. So in my case I just choose 0 because I only have one mail server and 0 is the highest priority. Just click on save. Note it could take some time for your DNS settings to get updated, but now you should be able to receive any emails. But what about sending emails? Well, there's one particular DNS record that is absolutely necessary for sending emails, and this is the RDNS record. That stands for reverse DNS, and it's also sometimes called the PTR for pointer resource record. And this is very important when you want to send emails, because most mail servers will perform a simple reverse DNS lookup to perform simple anti-spam checks. How does that work? Well, the reverse DNS lookup is what it sounds like. Well, it is a DNS query, but just backward. So the receiving mail server will check if your IP address is matching to the fully qualified domain name of your mail server. If you don't have a matching RDNS record, that looks suspicious. So the receiving mail server will probably just reject your email and send you an error 554 with PTR error, or just drop that email silently. So we need to make sure you have set up your RDNS record correctly. Note, this is not a record you need to set up on your DNS provider, because it is a reverse lookup on your IP address. So that typically needs to be added on your provider where you have hosted the public IP address of your server. So in my case, I'm hosting that at a VPS at a German hosting provider, so don't worry about the German here. So what you need to take care of is that RDNS record here. And this is the IPv4 address of my mail server, and the host name should be set to mail.thedigitalife.com. Remember, this is the A record that will resolve to the public IP address. So you have one DNS query that will resolve from the name to the IP address, and the RDNS record vice versa. So the RDNS server will resolve from that IP address to this fully qualified domain name. And these two things need to match. Okay, so we now have covered all the necessary DNS records for sending and receiving mail, so everything should work fine, right? Well, we are not finished yet, because there are a few DNS records you can add to improve the reputation of your mail server. And as I said at the beginning, this is very important, because sometimes other mail servers will reject emails from servers with a bad reputation, and they will even not send you an error message. So if you're missing those additional DNS records, you cannot be sure that your mail is really received by the recipient. So you need to take care of that, and we will cover 3 different DNS records that are recommended to build a good reputation. Let's start with the first one, and this is the SPF record, also called a Sender Policy Framework. Why do we need that? Well, the problem is that you can send an email with any domain in the envelope from type, even if the domain doesn't belong to you. So this is a very common method, and this is called spoofing. So that is used by attackers, spam mails, and so on. So they will try to send emails in behalf of your domain, and this can be a threat. The Sender Policy Framework is basically a TXT record on your DNS server that tells everybody which IP addresses or which hosts are allowed to send an email from your domain. So this is a very common method, and many email servers will check that SPF record, and when they cannot validate that a message is allowed to be sent from your IP address, they can just reject that. So we need to make sure that you add an SPF record on your DNS provider as well. Let's take a look at my SPF record. So this is this one here, and this is a TXT record for the host ad, and this will start with a V equal SPF1. So that tells us a protocol, and this is mandatory. You need to set this exactly to this name here. Then you type IP4 colon, and then the public IP address of your mail server. So this will tell everyone, so this IP address, and only this IP address, is allowed to send emails in behalf of your domain. So if you want to add an SPF record to your domain, you basically just click on add, select the type TXT, and then add this SPF record as a TXT value. So in my case, this is this one here. So click on save, and you should be fine. Note you can add a few changes or adjustments to this SPF record, so that will tell the receiving mail server how to react when the SPF check fails. So if you want to see all the different options, I've prepared you a cheat sheet for all these different mail server DNS records. You can just have a look at the video description below and have a look at the link to my cheat sheet, and then you will see all the different options for all different DNS records, so you don't need to remember everything in this video. So SPF is a good method to protect against spoofing, but it has some limitations. So therefore we have another DNS record that is called DKIM, and that stands for Domain Key Identified Mail. And this is an advanced protection method, and this allows the receiving mail server to check if that email was indeed sent by the owner of this domain. So when you add DKIM to your mail server will add a digital signature to every email you send out. And this digital signature contains a hash value that is encrypted with a private key, and the public key is stored as a DNS record on your DNS provider. So when the receiving mail server receives the email with your DKIM signature, that will tell the mail server where to look up the public key of this signature, and that can be used to verify if the DKIM signature is valid. And this method effectively protects your domain against spoofing, and this is very important. To add a DKIM record to your mail server, you need to do a few things. As I said, this is encrypted via a private key and validated via a public key. So you need to add a corresponding private and public key pair on your mail server. Your mail server will know the private key and only your mail server, so don't share the private key with anyone. And the public key is added as a DNS record on your DNS provider. Adding DKIM keys in a mailco server is pretty easy. If you don't know what a mailco server is, well, I've lately made a video about setting up a mail server with mailco Dockerized version on a Linux server in just about 10 minutes. So if you want to know that, check out the video. But you could also use a free DKIM generator on the public internet. I've put your link in the description below, so you could check out the dkimcore.org. That will generate a DKIM private and public key for you. You can copy on your mail server, and the public key you can add on your public DNS provider. If you're running a mailco server, you just go to the web interface, go to configuration, arc DKIM keys, and you can now add a DKIM key. You can see I've just added one key for the domain thedigitallife.com. So this is a public key, and I can absolutely share with you because everyone can just look that up. And the public key is only for validating the DKIM signature, but the private key is actually stored on the mailco server. If you want to generate a key pair on mailco, you just go here and click on add DKIM key, enter the name of your domain. Don't miss to enter a correct selector, so by default this is DKIM. So don't forget that, this is very important what you enter here as a selector, you need to enter on your public DNS server as well. Then I would recommend you to select a key length of 2048 bits and just click on add. So this will generate a key pair like this here, and you can just copy this value here, and on your DNS provider you click on add, click on txt, and now you need to enter the hostname beginning with the DKIM selector you have just used to create the private and public key pair. So in my case, this is a default DKIM __ domain key. And then we can just paste the value we have just copied as a txt value. So this starts with a DKIM1, so this is a version, and this should be always DKIM1. Then we have the encryption method, so this is RSA, and this is the default. Then we have some other optional parameters you could also change if you want to do that. Remember, if you want to know what all these different arguments mean, you can have a look at the cheat sheet on my written blog article. And then the P identifies the public key, so everyone can just look up and use to verify your DKIM signature. Click on save. So I hope this was not too difficult. Well, it really depends on what mail server you are using. If you're not running mailco and you don't have a graphical user interface, well, it probably could be a bit more difficult to add this DKIM key to your mail server, and this is really depending on what software you are using. So I can just show you the easy method with mailco, because I don't want to cover all these different mail servers that are out there. So if you're not sure how to do that, you should just refer to the documentation of your mail server and check up the documentation how to add a DKIM key. And last but not least, we have the next record that is called the DMARC record, and that stands for, well, I need to look up, Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. Wow, so this extends your SPF and DKIM record. So this will make sure that all your emails are protected with SPF and DKIM, and it will also tell the receiving mail server what to do with this email when those checks fail. To add a DMARC record, just click on add, select the type txt, and the host name should be _ DMARC. And now you need to fill in the value. So always start with a v equal DMARC1, and that always needs to be this value. Then enter p equal, and then you can choose from 3 different values. We have none, quarantine and reject, and that will tell the receiving mail server what it should do with an email that fails those SPF or DKIM checks. So in case of quarantine, the receiving email server should quarantine the email that is failing those checks. But you could also choose none for do nothing or reject, so that will just reject the email. There are also some other optional arguments you could use to send daily reports or specific percentage of suspicious mails the DMARC policy should apply to. So you can find all the different options in my mail server DNS record cheat sheet. Okay, so now you should be able to send, receive emails, and your domain should be protected against spoofing and other bad things. But we are not finished yet, because there are also some other DNS records that could be useful when you want to use email clients like Outlook or Thunderbird, and they should be able to auto-discover the settings of your mail server, so you don't need to specify an IMAP server with a port number and so on. So this is also done via some DNS records, and they are defined in an RFC standard 6186, I remember. And you will find a link to that standard in my written blog article, but this is not really so important because I will show you all the different DNS records that are very important to enable those auto-discovery features on mail clients. So if you want to add those auto-discovery DNS records, you need to add those SRV records. And there are a bunch of different records that tell the email client where to look up the specific settings for your mail server. For example, the IMAP setting, so there you will define the fully qualified domain name of your IMAP server, the port number, and so on. So those DNS records are defined in the RFC standard, but I also have added this one here, so this is used by some Outlook clients, because Outlook is always a special thing, I think. If you want to add those SRV records, just click on Add. Select the type SRV, and then you will need to start with the service. So the service could be _SMTPS, IMAP, or IMAP-S. Let's start with IMAP-S, for example. Then you will need to specify the protocol. So this should always be _TCP, because this is always a TCP connection. The name should be add, and the target should be the fully qualified domain name of your IMAP-S server. The priority is 0, so there you could also add a priority for fallback servers and so on. The weight is 1, and the port number for IMAP-S in this case is 993. Click on Save, and then you just need to continue with all the different records that are defined in the RFC standards. Remember, you find all of these things in my cheat sheet. If you want to test if all your settings are correct, I can just recommend you the tool MXtoolbox. So this is a diagnostic tool where you can check up a domain name. So for example, let's just check the digitallife.com and let's perform an MX lookup. So this will automatically do some diagnostic settings and check if everything is working fine. So this is mail.thedigitallife.com, this is a public IP address, the TTL value, the DMARC record is published, the DMARC policy is enabled, and a DNS record is also found. You can also check other settings like the blacklist check, so that will reveal if your mail server or the IP address of your mail server is on one of these blacklists. You could also do an SPF record lookup, let's check that, and if we perform that we can see there's our SPF record, SPF1 with the IP address -all, and this is set up correct. So MXtoolbox is a very useful tool, and I think it's absolutely necessary to check if your DNS records are correct on your mail server. It also could reveal some warnings or some things you could improve, so like TTL values or something like that. And I don't want to cover too much in this video because I think we have covered a lot. So I hope this helps you to configure your mail server and your DNS records for your mail server, and you could understand some of the advanced techniques how to protect your domain against spam and spoofing. So don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed that video, and if you have any question you can also leave me a comment or just join my Discord community, a link in the video description below, check it out. Before I go, I need to thank Mason, who is the producer of this show, and all my Patreon supporters, so without you, the community, this wouldn't be possible at all. So thanks everybody for watching, enjoy the rest of your day, take care of yourself, and I see you soon.